Welcome to 20 of the stupidest cars of all time. So bizarre, you won't believe they were real. Stick around, because the final car is so unbelievably stupid, you'll have to see it to believe it. Number 20, 1933 Fuller Dymaxion. So, we begin our bumpy ride with the 1933 Fuller Dymaxion, a vehicle that promised the future but delivered a head-scratching experience. Imagine a car that looks like a Zeppelin on wheels, and you've got the Dymaxion. Its teardrop design was meant to slice through the air with minimal resistance, aiming for top-notch fuel efficiency and speed. Stretching a whopping 20 feet, this three-wheeler had a rear-mounted Ford V8 engine that powered the front wheels, a setup that was as unconventional as wearing socks with sandals. Now, let's talk about that single rear wheel which handled the steering. It could pivot a full 90 degrees, allowing the Dymaxion to turn on a dime. Sounds nifty, right? Well, in theory, yes. In practice, it made the car about as stable as a unicyclist on ice. Drivers found it challenging to control, especially at higher speeds, or when the wind decided to join the party. It's as if the car had a mind of its own, and that mind was a prankster. The Dymaxion was designed to carry up to 11 passengers, and boasted a top speed of 90 miles per hour, with fuel efficiency around 30 miles per gallon. Impressive numbers for the 1930s. But getting this behemoth to move was one thing. Keeping it under control was another. The rear wheel steering system was so unpredictable that driving it felt like trying to herd cats. Frustrating, and a tad dangerous. Safety? Well, let's just say the Dymaxion had a bit of an identity crisis. During its debut at the 1933 Chicago World's Fair, a prototype was involved in a fatal accident. The car rolled over, leading to the death of its driver and serious injuries to passengers. While the exact cause of the crash is still debated, it didn't do any favors for the Dymaxion's reputation. Investors quickly lost interest, and only 3 prototypes were ever built. Finally, the Dymaxion was a sinkhole. The second prototype cost $7,688 to build, which is roughly $130,000 today. Despite the hefty price tag, the car failed to attract buyers, and the project fizzled out faster than a lead balloon. It's a classic case of aiming for the stars but not quite clearing the treetops. So the next car could practically fit in your pocket, if only it was a little more reliable. This car made a big splash, but mostly for all the wrong reasons. Can you guess which one it is? Number 19, 1966 Renault Dauphine. The 1956 Renault Dauphine. A car that proves France isn't just about baguettes, berets, and existential crises. This little wonder was supposed to be the French answer to the Volkswagen Beetle, but instead, it became the automotive equivalent of a soufflé that collapses the moment you open the oven. Let's dive into the glorious mess that is the Dauphine, a car that somehow managed to be both charming and catastrophically bad at the same time. First, let's talk about the design. The Dauphine looked like a marshmallow that had been gently squished by a giant hand. It was small, round, and undeniably cute, like a puppy you'd see in a 1950s cartoon. But don't let its adorable exterior fool you. Underneath that soft, curvy shell lurked a car that was about as reliable as a weather forecast in the middle of a hurricane. The Dauphine was powered by a rear-mounted 845cc engine that produced a whopping 30 horsepower. Yes, you read that right, 30 horsepower. That's less power than most modern lawnmowers. To put it into perspective, the Dauphine's 0 to 60 mile per hour time was roughly... eventually. It was so slow that even snails would overtake it, probably while laughing. And don't even think about climbing a hill, unless you enjoy the sound of your engine screaming like it's being tortured. But wait, it gets better. The Dauphine was notorious for its legendary build quality. Rust was practically a factory option. If you parked it outside during a light drizzle, you'd come back to find it had dissolved into a puddle of orange dust. The electrical system was equally reliable, often deciding to take a nap at the most inconvenient times. And let's not forget the brakes, which were about as effective as yelling, "Stop!" at the top of your lungs. Now, let's talk about the price. In the US, the Dauphine sold for around $1,445, which was cheap, even by 1950 standards. But as the saying goes, you get what you pay for. And what you got was a car that spent more time in the repair shop than on the road. It was so bad that Renault had to offer free towing services to stranded Dauphine owners. Imagine buying a car and immediately being handed a AAA membership because the manufacturer knows it's going to break down. Despite its many flaws, the Dauphine had a certain quirky charm. It was light, nimble, and perfect for zipping around narrow European streets. It even had a decent-sized trunk in the front, because of course the engine was in the back. And let's not forget its starring role in the 1960s as the car of choice for beatniks and intellectuals who wanted to look cool, while pretending not to care about their car breaking down every other week. So why does the Dauphine deserve a spot in the Stupid Cars of All Time Hall of Fame? Because it's a reminder that sometimes style and charm can't make up for sheer incompetence. It's the automotive equivalent of a French mime, entertaining for a few minutes, but ultimately frustrating and kind of pointless. The next one is a car that was supposed to revolutionize the auto industry, but instead became the poster child for what not to do. Can you guess which one it is? Number 18, 1958, Ford Edsel. Continuing our journey through automotive misadventures, we arrive at 1958, the year Ford unveiled the Edsel, a car that has since become synonymous with commercial failure. Named after Henry Ford's son, the Edsel was marketed as the car of the future, but it quickly became a cautionary tale in the annals of automotive history. At first glance, the Edsel's design was polarizing. Its most distinctive feature was the vertical grille, which some critics unkindly likened to a horse collar, or even a toilet seat. This bold design choice was intended to set the Edsel apart from other vehicles on the road, but it often elicited more confusion than admiration. The car's aesthetics were a gamble that didn't pay off, leaving many consumers scratching their heads. Under the hood, the Edsel offered several engine options, including a 361 cubic inch or 5.9-liter V8 engine that provided around 303 horsepower. While these specifications were respectable for the era, they weren't groundbreaking enough to justify the car's premium positioning in the market. The performance was adequate, but it failed to deliver the revolutionary driving experience that Ford had promised. Pricing for the Edsel varied across its multiple models, with the base sticker price for the Edsel Citation, a top-tier model, starting at a hefty $3,766 before options. This pricing placed the Edsel in a competitive bracket, but it struggled to justify its cost against established competitors. Consumers were hesitant to invest in a brand new nameplate that didn't offer clear advantages over existing models. So why did the Edsel earn its reputation as one of the automotive industry's most notorious flops? The reasons are multifaceted. Ford's marketing campaign for the Edsel was extensive, building up enormous expectations. When the car finally debuted, it couldn't live up to the hype, leading to widespread disappointment among consumers. The Edsel was launched during a recession, which made consumers more conservative with their spending. The economic downturn meant that fewer people were willing to take a chance on an unproven and expensive new car. Ford aimed the Edsel at a market segment that was shrinking. The mid-priced car market was declining, and Ford's attempt to capture this segment with the Edsel was a miscalculation. Early models of the Edsel suffered from quality problems, including mechanical failures and poor assembly. These issues further tarnished the car's reputation and discouraged potential buyers. The next one is a car that could have had a bright future, if only it didn't have a tendency to explode when rear-ended. It's the car that made going up in flames a bit too literal. Any idea which one this could be? Number 17. 1971 Ford Pinto. Imagine buying a brand new car only to discover that it had a fatal flaw. At first glance, the Ford Pinto seemed like the perfect answer to America's growing demand for small, affordable cars. But beneath its budget-friendly price tag lurked a deadly flaw, one that would turn this car into a ticking time bomb on wheels. Ford promised efficiency and value, but what drivers got was one of the most notorious scandals in automotive history. Designed in a record-breaking 25 months instead of the usual 43, the Pinto was rushed into production with a price tag of around $2,000. It had a basic, lightweight design with a fastback sedan body and a hatchback option. But in their quest to make it as cheap as possible, Ford cut corners. Literally. The Pinto was built with minimal safety features, which turned out to be a catastrophic mistake. Under the hood, it came with a 1.6-liter or 2-liter inline-4 engine, producing modest power. It wasn't a performance car by any stretch, but it was nimble for city driving. However, its biggest flaw wasn't how slow it was how dangerously explosive it could be. The Pinto's fuel tank was positioned right behind the rear axle, with almost no protection. In a rear-end collision, the tank could be punctured by bolts or crushed entirely, leading to fires and explosions. Ford engineers knew about this flaw and even had affordable fixes, like a rubber bladder or a protective shield. But in an attempt to save a few bucks per car, they decided to ignore the problem. The result? Lawsuits, bad press, and a reputation that would haunt Ford for years. The most famous case, Grimshaw v. Ford Motor Company, exposed how Ford calculated that paying off potential burn victims would be cheaper than fixing the design. That decision cost the company millions and turned the Pinto into a rolling joke in the car world. Unlike the Pinto, we don't cut corners. So subscribe and stay safe from missing out on wild car stories. Up next, we have a car so bizarre that it makes the Pinto look normal. Can you guess what it is? Number 16. 1970 to 1978 AMC Gremlin. The AMC Gremlin might be remembered with some nostalgic charm, but let's be real, it was a nightmare to drive. Built as AMC's answer to the rising tide of cheap imports, the Gremlin was essentially a chopped-down Hornet with a stumpy wheelbase and a design that looked like someone had taken a buzzsaw to the back half of a normal car. The result? A subcompact that was as awkward to drive as it was to look at. The Gremlin's biggest issue was its weight distribution. Despite being a small car, it was saddled with AMC's big, heavy inline-six engines. An odd choice when the goal was to compete with lightweight, fuel-efficient imports, like the Volkswagen Beetle and Toyota Corolla. The 199 and 232 cubic-inch six-cylinders made decent power, but they threw off the car's balance, making it nose-heavy and sluggish. Worse yet, AMC didn't bother engineering a proper rear suspension setup. Since it was just a shortened Hornet, chopping off those extra 12 inches also meant sacrificing suspension travel in the rear. The result? A choppy, jittery ride that made every pothole feel like a crater. Handling was equally awful. The rear axle hopped around unpredictably, and the car's short wheelbase only made things worse. The steering felt loose and hard to control, sometimes even scary. Throw in a heavy clutch and clunky gear changes, and the Gremlin quickly earned a reputation for being one of the most miserable driving experiences of the 1970s. It might have looked funky and different, but behind the wheel it was more of a chore than a joy. Even AMC's attempts to inject personality into the Gremlin, like the Levi's edition with denim-inspired seats, couldn't distract from the fact that this was a rough-riding, poorly engineered attempt at a compact car. Some buyers stuck with it out of brand loyalty, but compared to the competition, the Gremlin was simply outclassed. The next one is a car that makes you wonder if they just ran out of time designing it. Can you guess this quirky little ride? Number 15. 1982 Chevrolet Camaro Iron Duke. The 1982 Camaro Iron Duke is the kind of car that makes you shake your head and wonder, what were they thinking? This was supposed to be a Camaro, a name that had always been linked to power, speed, and muscle car dominance. But instead of roaring down the road with a high-performance V8, some unlucky buyers got stuck with a tiny 2.5-liter four-cylinder engine called the Iron Duke. The name sounds cool, but in reality it was anything but that. With just 90 horsepower, this engine was hopelessly weak, turning the Camaro into one of the slowest muscle cars ever made. To put it in perspective, the Camaro took nearly 20 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour, an eternity for a car that was supposed to be fast and exciting. It wasn't just slow, it felt underpowered in every way. Press the gas pedal, and instead of the thrilling roar of a V8, you get a soft, struggling hum, like the car was begging for mercy. Some owners joked that driving the Iron Duke Camaro felt like trying to push a heavy shopping cart uphill. It just didn't have enough muscle to back up its aggressive looks. Chevrolet made this decision in an attempt to meet strict fuel economy rules and appeal to a changing market, but it completely backfired. People didn't buy Camaros for fuel savings, they bought them for speed and style. Sure, the 1982 model had a sleek new design with a long hood, sharp lines, and an aerodynamic shape, but without a real engine to match, it felt like a hollow shell. It was all bark and no bite. Even worse, the Iron Duke engine was noisy and unrefined, making the driving experience frustrating rather than fun. The weak suspension and poor handling didn't help either, making the Camaro feel more like a basic economy car than a true performance machine. Drivers who expected a thrilling ride were instead stuck with a car that struggled to pass even slower-moving traffic. Ultimately, the 1982 Camaro Iron Duke became a cautionary tale of what happens when an iconic muscle car is stripped of its identity. While some cars from this era still have a nostalgic charm, this one is mostly remembered as one of the biggest disappointments in Camaro history. A car that tried to be efficient, but ended up being boring instead. The next one is a car that promised the future, but ended up stuck in the past. Can you guess which time traveler this is? Number 14, 1981 DeLorean DMC-12. At number 14, we have the 1981 DeLorean DMC-12, a car that looks straight out of a sci-fi movie, but ended up as one of the most baffling flops in automotive history. At first glance, the DeLorean is pure nostalgia in stainless steel. With its iconic gull-wing doors and futuristic brushed metal body, it's the car you'd imagine zooming off into a time vortex. Designed by the American engineer John DeLorean, and produced in a super ambitious but troubled factory in Northern Ireland, the DMC-12 was meant to introduce a new era of performance and style. Instead, it quickly earned a reputation for being as impractical as it was striking. Under the hood, the 1981 model was powered by a 2.85-liter PRV V6 engine that delivered roughly 130 horsepower. Hardly the muscle needed to justify its time machine looks. In real-world terms, this meant the DeLorean was more about style than speed. While its gull-wing doors certainly opened conversations, and a few exasperated sighs when trying to exit in a tight parking lot, the engine performance was a letdown for those expecting a high-octane thrill ride. It's a case of if looks could kill. Except in this scenario, the looks are deadly distracting while the performance barely moves the needle. Production was riddled with challenges from quality control issues to skyrocketing costs that eventually doomed the project. Priced at around $25,000 when it first hit showrooms, the DeLorean was marketed as a cutting-edge sports car. Yet it ended up being an expensive curiosity. Its stainless steel body, though undeniably futuristic, didn't hide the fact that it was built with compromises. The chassis, for example, wasn't as refined as its competitors, and the car struggled with handling quirks that made every drive feel like a lesson in what not to do in automotive design. And then there's the infamous legacy. While the DeLorean would later gain cult status thanks to its starring role in Back to the Future, in 1981 it was seen as a bold yet baffling experiment. It's almost as if DeLorean thought, why settle for a car that just goes from A to B, when you can have one that makes you question if you're really in the future? Spoiler alert, it didn't work out that way. The DMC-12 became the poster child for a car that aimed too high on aesthetics while falling short on performance and practicality. The next car may have been built like a tank, but unfortunately it didn't have the speed to match. It's like trying to race into the future and forgetting to hit the gas. If you don't want to miss what's next, consider subscribing to stay ahead of the curve. Number 13. 1957 to 1990 Trabant 601. Remember a time when buying a car could mean waiting a decade or even more? Enter the Trabant 601, a tiny car that quietly ruled the roads of East Germany from the late 1960s until 1990. Though it wasn't built for speed or luxury, its quirky charm and if-it-ain't-broke attitude made it unforgettable. Unlike most cars built with metal, the Trabant 601 sported a body made of Duroplast, a hard recycled plastic made from cotton waste and resin. Yes, you heard that right. While it might sound like a high-tech idea, in practice, it gave the 601 a look that was more frozen lunchbox than sleek ride. The upside, it never rusted much, though it could crack in the cold. Under the hood, the Trabant 601 was powered by a small two-stroke engine of about 600 cc. It produced roughly 20 to 23 horsepower. Imagine your average scooter trying to pull a car. Acceleration was a slow crawl. It took nearly 21 seconds to reach its top speed of about 62 miles per hour. So, if you ever needed to escape an awkward conversation, you might just have enough time to reconsider your life choices. And yes, that engine was notorious for puffing out a thick cloud of smoke, making every drive a hazy memory. In East Germany, owning a Trabant wasn't as simple as driving off the lot. Due to production shortages and the centrally planned economy, buyers often waited 10 to 13 years for their very own Trabant 601. The long wait made the car both a prized possession and a running joke. Imagine telling your friends, "I've been waiting since I was a kid for my Trabant." It became a symbol of a whole era, a time when cars were more about survival than style. The Trabant 601 wasn't designed to win any races. It was built to be cheap, easy to fix, and just good enough for everyday use. Its simple design meant that repairs were a DIY delight, and parts were often interchangeable across years. For many, the Trabant was a lesson in humble ingenuity. Sure, it wasn't pretty by Western standards, but in its own way it had personality. It became the car that helped East Germans cross into freedom when the Berlin Wall finally fell. A rolling piece of history that everyone loved to laugh about. Today, the Trabant 601 is a cult classic. Car clubs in Germany and beyond celebrate it as a symbol of a bygone era, and its unique design is a favorite subject for retro enthusiasts. While modern cars boast high-tech gadgets and roaring engines, the Trabant reminds us that sometimes a little quirkiness and a whole lot of character can leave a lasting impression, even if it's just a spark plug with a roof. Next up, a car that was more about tipping over than driving fast. Which infamous three-wheeler could this be? Number 12, 1973 to 1981 Reliant Robin. Imagine a car so wobbly it makes a drunk flamingo look stable. Meet the Reliant Robin. Britain's answer to the question, what if we built a car, but forgot one wheel? This plastic-bolted three-wheeled vehicle, and I use that term loosely, wasn't just a car. It was a slapstick comedy act on wheels. Let's dive into why the Robin became the king of curb-hopping chaos. The Reliant Robin looked like someone took a normal car, sawed off a wheel, and yelled, "Good enough!" Its lightweight fiberglass body, translation, fancy plastic, weighed less than a sack of potatoes, which was great for saving fuel, and terrible for staying upright. The single front wheel meant turning corners was like playing Russian roulette. Would you make it? Or would you flip over and become a roadside attraction? Place your bets. Under its comically tiny hood sat a 750cc engine that produced a blistering 39 horsepower. To put that in perspective, your grandma's lawnmower probably packs more punch. The Robin's top speed was officially 85 miles per hour, but hitting 60 miles felt like waiting for a sloth to finish a marathon. The 0 to 60 miles per hour time? Let's just say you could make a cup of tea, sip it, and still have time to wave at people as you slowly passed by. Here's the kicker. In the UK, three-wheelers were classified as motorcycles. That meant you could drive a Robin with a motorcycle license. No car license needed. It was a loophole on wheels. Perfect for folks who thought, I want a car, but I also want to risk my dignity daily. The Robin's party trick? Flipping over if you stared at it too hard. Take a corner too fast? Flip. Hit a pothole? Flip. Strong breeze? Believe it or not, flip. The car's top-heavy design and single front wheel made it as stable as a Jenga tower in an earthquake. Entire YouTube compilations exist of Robins turtling on their roofs, wheels spinning helplessly in the air. It's like the car had a magnetic attraction to the ground, just not the right way up. Reliant tried to fix the tipping with anti-roll bars. Spoiler, they didn't. Owners got creative, loading the trunk with bricks to weigh it down. Nothing says safe driving like hauling a bag of rubble. The Robin also had a 4-speed manual gearbox, but let's be real, the only gear drivers used was panic. The Robin sold over 50,000 units because it was cheap to buy and run. But here's the problem, people like not dying. The tipping was legendary. Even the BBC's Top Gear famously rolled one down a hill for laughs. The Robin became a punchline, not a car. By 1981, even Reliant knew the jig was up. They added a fourth wheel later, but the damage was done. The Robin's legacy? A meme before memes existed. The Robin's fiberglass body was so light, 2 people could lift it. Perfect for when it unavoidably flipped. It once starred in a British sitcom as a character's cool car. The joke wrote itself. Thieves loved stealing Robins by literally picking them up and walking away. Number 11. 1981 to 1988 Cadillac Cimarron. The 1981 to 1988 Cadillac Cimarron is one of those cars that makes you wonder if someone accidentally put a Cadillac badge on a Chevrolet Cavalier. In simple terms, Cadillac tried to create a smaller luxury car to compete with sleek European models. But they ended up with a car that was basically a fancier version of an economy car. Instead of building a unique car, Cadillac had only about 10 months to work on the Cimarron. The result? A hurried rework of the GMJ body that looked almost exactly like the Cavalier. yet it cost nearly twice as much. Badge engineering doesn't always go wrong, but the Cimarron was a textbook disaster. It was meant to be an entry-level Cadillac, but the problem was that it didn't feel like one. The only thing luxurious about it was the badge, while everything else, from the styling to the build quality, was disappointingly basic. The Cimarron had upgraded touches like leather seats and a glossy badge, but underneath, it was nothing more than a rebadged Chevrolet Cavalier. This trick did not fool anyone, and critics quickly pointed out that paying a premium for what was essentially a cheap car was a major mistake. The biggest letdown was the performance. In its early years, the only engine option was a tiny 1.8-liter four-cylinder that cranked out around 85 to 88 horsepower. For a Cadillac, you'd expect smooth acceleration and effortless highway cruising, not an underpowered economy car struggling to keep up with traffic. Later, a 2.8-liter V6 became available, but even that wasn't enough to make the car feel quick or exciting. Instead of offering luxury power and refinement, the Cimarron gave buyers a sluggish driving experience, wrapped in disappointment. Cadillac had little time to make major changes, and it showed. The design ended up sharing nearly every exterior panel with its less expensive siblings from Chevrolet, Buick, and Pontiac. It looked Cadillac only because of a few extra trim details and a fancy badge, but those touches couldn't hide the fact that it was a Cavalier in a Cadillac suit. Buyers weren't fooled, and sales figures reflected that. Instead of capturing new customers, the Cimarron ended up tarnishing Cadillac's reputation. Think of it like this. You go to a fancy restaurant expecting a gourmet meal, but they serve you a burger from the fast food joint next door. Only the bun is toasted with a bit of extra butter and they slap a gold label on it. You're still left wondering why you paid so much more for basically the same thing. That's the Cadillac Cimarron in a nutshell. Despite its high price tag, the car's sales never lived up to expectations, and over its 7-year run, it sold only about 132,000 units. Tiny numbers compared to other luxury models. Time Magazine and Car Buzz have both called it a textbook example of bad badge engineering, while critics joked that Cadillac had essentially tried to sell you a fancy Chevy in a suit. Number 10. 2001 to 2010 Chrysler PT Cruiser. The 2001 to 2010 Chrysler PT Cruiser is a car that looks like it jumped out of a 1940s postcard and landed in the modern world, only to discover it wasn't quite ready for today's roads. Once hailed as a quirky retro blast from the past, the PT Cruiser eventually became more of a head-scratcher than a head-turner. Let's break down what went wrong with this time-traveling vehicle. Under the hood, the PT Cruiser was usually powered by a 2.4-liter inline-4 engine. In its standard form, it cranked out around 150 horsepower and a modest amount of torque, good enough for daily driving, but nothing that would really get your heart racing. The sportier PT Cruiser GT version got a turbocharged boost to roughly 180 horsepower, which improved its 0 to 60 miles per hour time a bit, but even then it was more adequate than exciting. It could reach a top speed of about 115 miles per hour, but let's be honest, you weren't exactly lining up for a drag race in a car that looks like a retro diner on wheels. The design of the PT Cruiser is what really sets it apart. Or depending on your point of view, what really makes you shake your head. Chrysler went all out with a style that paid homage to vintage American cars, complete with curved lines, a high boxy roof, and chrome accents that made it look like it was straight out of a 1940s drive-in movie. And for a while, that retro charm worked. People loved its unique look. It was different from the run-of-the-mill modern hatchbacks on the road. However, as the years rolled on, what was once seen as quirky and cool began to look outdated and a bit tired. The car's styling didn't evolve much over its production run, so while other cars got sleek and modern updates, the PT Cruiser remained stuck in its retro bubble. It became a car you'd see and then say, "That's cute, but it's not really my cup of tea." But it wasn't just about looks. The PT Cruiser struggled in many ways. The handling was not as crisp as many hoped for. Its suspension, tuned more for comfort than sporty driving, often left it feeling heavy and unresponsive when you took a corner too fast. And while the car's design was supposed to evoke nostalgia, the reality was that its performance was underwhelming. The 150 horsepower engine, even in turbo form, didn't quite deliver the kind of punch you'd expect from a car with such a bold personality. Critics also noted that the quality of materials and build could feel a bit cheap. Interior plastics and trims sometimes felt out of place, in what was marketed as a premium retro-inspired vehicle. In simple terms, it was like putting a vintage dress on a bargain bin mannequin. Nice to look at from a distance, but disappointing when you get up close. Next up, a car that looks like it belongs in a parade, not on the highway. Can you guess this flashy yet impractical ride? Number 9. 1997 Plymouth Prowler. The 1997 Plymouth Prowler is a car that seems to have leaped straight out of a hot rod enthusiast's sketchbook, boasting a design that screams, "Look at me!" with its open-wheel front end and low-slung body. However, beneath this eye-catching exterior lies a vehicle that left many scratching their heads, wondering if style had completely overtaken substance. Under its elongated hood, the Prowler houses a 3.5-liter V6 engine, producing 214 horsepower at 5,850 RPM and 221 pound-feet of torque at 3,100 RPM. While these numbers might seem adequate, they fall short of delivering the thrilling performance one might expect from such an aggressively styled vehicle. The Prowler's 0 to 60 miles per hour acceleration time hovers around 7.5 seconds, which is respectable, but hardly exhilarating for a car that looks like it was built for speed. The Prowler comes equipped with a 4-speed automatic transmission featuring auto stick, allowing drivers to manually select gears. Power is sent to the rear wheels, staying true to its hot rod inspiration. However, the absence of a manual transmission option disappointed many purists, who felt that a stick shift was essential for a genuine driving experience in a car of this nature. Measuring 165 inches in length, 76 inches in width, and 51 inches in height, the Prowler has a compact yet aggressive stance. Despite its aluminum-intensive construction aimed at weight reduction, the car weighs in at approximately 2,800 pounds. This weight, combined with its modest power output, contributes to its underwhelming performance. The Prowler's design is undeniably its most striking feature. With open Indy racer-style front wheels and a body that pays homage to 1930s hot rods, it stands out in any crowd. However, this retro-futuristic aesthetic is a classic case of form over function. The open-wheel design, while visually distinctive, offers no practical benefits, and can be seen as a gimmick rather than a functional design choice. Upon its release, the Prowler generated significant buzz due to its radical design. However, this initial excitement quickly gave way to criticism. The car's performance failed to match its aggressive looks, leading to disappointment among enthusiasts. Additionally, the high price point, combined with limited practicality and comfort, made it a tough sell. As a result, the Prowler is often remembered as a vehicle that prioritized style over substance, serving as a reminder that a car's performance should align with its appearance. Number 8. 1962 to 1965 Peel P50. The 1962 to 1965 Peel P50 is the kind of car that makes you stop and ask, was this thing built as a joke? And honestly, that's not far from the truth. Designed by the Peel Engineering Company on the Isle of Man, the P50 was officially the smallest production car ever made. It measured just 54 inches long, 39 inches wide, and 47 inches tall. Basically the size of a phone booth on wheels. If you were looking for a serious vehicle to take on the open road, this was definitely not it. Let's talk about its looks first. The Peel P50 wasn't just small, it was comically tiny. It had 3 wheels, a single door on the left side, one tiny headlight up front, and a single windshield wiper that looked like it was borrowed from a toy car. It appeared less like a real automobile and more like something you'd find at a carnival ride, or a child's pedal car that someone accidentally put an engine into. If you ever wanted to drive something that looked like a rolling fishbowl, the P50 was the car for you. Speaking of the engine, if you can even call it that, the P50 was powered by a 49cc single-cylinder moped engine that put out a staggering 4.5 horsepower. For reference, some modern lawnmowers have more power than that. The top speed was about 38 miles per hour, which meant that even a determined cyclist could probably pass you on a good day. And don't even think about tackling hills unless you were willing to get out and push. One of the P50's biggest problems, besides looking ridiculous, was its practicality, or lack of it. There was no reverse gear, meaning if you needed to back up, you had to physically get out and drag the car around by its handle. Yes, it actually had a handle on the back, like a suitcase, so you could reposition it when needed. At just 130 pounds, It was light enough that some owners would literally pick it up and carry it into their homes when they were done driving. Then there was the interior, or whatever you'd call the tiny space inside. It had one seat, a basic steering wheel, and not much else. The dashboard, barely there. Legroom, non-existent. If you were tall, driving one of these would feel like sitting inside a shoebox. There was room for the driver and maybe a small bag of groceries, but if you were planning on taking a passenger, forget about it. So why did it fail? Well, aside from the fact that it looked ridiculous and was slower than a jogger, people quickly realized that they wanted a car that could, actually carry things and go faster than walking speed. It was expensive for what it offered, and although Peel advertised it as being able to fit indoors like a piece of furniture, most people didn't want to store their car in their living room. By 1965, production stopped, and the Peel P50 faded into obscurity, only to later become famous for being in the Guinness Book of World Records as the smallest production car ever made. Next up, a car that's often remembered for being more of a punchline than a ride. Can you guess which budget-friendly disaster this is? Number 7. 1985 to 1992 Yugo GV. The Yugo GV, produced from 1985 to 1992, is often remembered as a car that promised affordability, but delivered a driving experience that left much to be desired. Marketed in the United States by entrepreneur Malcolm Bricklin, the Yugo GV was introduced with a base price of $3,990, making it the cheapest new car available in the country at the time. Under the hood, the Yugo GV was equipped with a 1.1-liter inline-4 engine, producing approximately 55 horsepower. This modest power output resulted in a 0 to 60 miles per hour acceleration time that felt as slow as waiting for water to boil. The car's top speed was around 86 miles per hour, but reaching this velocity was an adventure best left to the brave. The Yugo GV's design was as plain as its performance. Its boxy shape had no style, and the inside was filled with cheap plastic and basic cloth seats. It came with very few features, and things like air conditioning or a rear window defroster were considered extras. Initially, the Yugo GV attracted buyers with its rock-bottom price, leading to strong early sales. However, it didn't take long for the honeymoon to end. Owners reported a litany of issues, from mechanical failures to poor build quality. Number 6. 2001 to 2005 Pontiac Aztek. The Pontiac Aztek, made from 2001 to 2005, is a car that tried to stand out but ended up being remembered for all the wrong reasons. It's often called one of the worst designed cars ever made. But it's also a fascinating example of what happens when a car tries too hard to be different. While it had some clever features, its strange looks and underwhelming performance made it a target for jokes and criticism. The Aztek's design is what really made it stand out, but not in a good way. It had a boxy, rugged look with lots of plastic cladding on the outside, which was supposed to make it seem tough and ready for outdoor adventures. However, most people thought it looked awkward and unattractive. Some even called it ugly or weird. While Pontiac was trying to create something bold and unique, the result was a car that many found hard to look at. Inside, the Aztek had some practical features. It could seat 5 people and had a lot of cargo space. 45.4 cubic feet with the seats up, and 93.5 cubic feet with the rear seats folded down. It even had some fun extras, like a removable cooler built into the center console, and an optional tent package that turned the car into a mini campsite. These features were great for people who loved the outdoors, but they weren't enough to make up for the car's other flaws. Under the hood, the Aztek came with a 3.4-liter V6 engine that made 185 horsepower and 210 pound-feet of torque. While that might sound decent, it wasn't very impressive for its time. It took about 9.3 seconds to go from 0 to 60 miles per hour, which was slower than many other cars in its class. It also wasn't great on gas, getting around 17 miles per gallon in the city and 24 miles per gallon on the highway. For a car that was supposed to be adventurous, it didn't have the power or efficiency to back it up. When the Pontiac Aztek first came out, people did not have nice things to say about it. Car experts were pretty harsh. Edmunds said it was useful, like a mix between a minivan and an SUV, but its ugly design and weak engine made it a bad choice. Car and Driver was even meaner, saying it looked like a sad fat man who'd had his nose cut off. Yikes. Even though the Aztek had some smart features inside, its weird shape and boring performance made people stay away. Sales were terrible. and it's now often called one of the worst cars ever made. But surprisingly, over time, some people started to like it. A big reason for this was its role in the hit TV show Breaking Bad, where it became a symbol of the main character's struggles. Now some folks think its unusual design makes it kinda cool. So bad, it's good. Number 5. 1974 to 1975 Bricklin SV-1. The Bricklin SV-1, Canada's bold attempt to build a sports car that screamed, "Safety first," but ended up whispering, "What were they thinking?" Produced from 1974 to 1975, this quirky little machine was supposed to be the ultimate blend of speed and safety. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Let's dive into the glorious mess that is the Bricklin SV-1. Under the hood, the 1974 model came with a 360 cubic inch AMC V8 engine, pumping out a respectable 220 horsepower and 315 pound-feet of torque. Not too shabby, right? Well, hold your applause. By 1975, Bricklin ran into supply issues and had to switch to a Ford Windsor V8 engine, which was about as exciting as a wet sock. 175 horsepower and 286 pound-feet of torque. With a 3-speed automatic transmission, this car had all the speed of a lazy Sunday afternoon. Hitting 60 miles per hour, you had time to grab a coffee. Now, let's talk about the design. The SV-1 had gull-wing doors, which are cool if you're a DeLorean or a superhero. But on the Bricklin, they just screamed, "Look at me! I'm trying too hard." The body was made of fiberglass with an acrylic skin, so it didn't need paint. That's right, no paint, because who needs color when you can have clear plastic? Sure, it was rust-resistant, but it also weighed a whopping 3,500 pounds. That's like strapping a small elephant to your sports car. No wonder it wasn't exactly a speed demon. And then there were the safety features. The SV-1 was supposed to be the safest sports car on the road, but let's be real, it was about as safe as a shopping cart with a jet engine. The gull-wing doors were prone to breaking, the acrylic skin scratched if you looked at it wrong, and the whole thing was about as reliable as a weather forecast. Oh, and the price. It started at $4,000 but quickly ballooned to $7,500 by 1974. For that kind of money, you could buy a real sports car and still have enough left over for a lifetime supply of maple syrup. Next up is a convertible truck with a confused identity. This one had the looks, but not the function. Guess which one it is. Number 4. 2003 to 2006 Chevrolet SSR. The Chevrolet SSR, which stands for Super Sport Roadster, a fancy way of saying, "Hey, look at me!" was made between 2003 and 2006. Imagine taking a classic 1940s or 50s Chevrolet truck, giving it a wild makeover, and slapping on a fancy retractable hardtop. That's the SSR for you. Think of it as the stylish cousin of your regular pickup who shows up to family picnics in sunglasses and a convertible. But spoiler alert, it didn't catch on as much as they had hoped, leading to its retirement after just a few years in the spotlight. At first, the SSR came with a 5.3-liter V8 engine, which was basically like having a nifty sidekick that could kick out 300 horsepower. This setup helped it sprint from 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 7.6 seconds. Faster than your average tortoise, but still not exactly the Flash. In 2005, Chevy decided to give it a superhero upgrade with a beefier 6-liter V8 engine that cranked up the power to a whopping 390 horses, and 395 with a special 6-speed manual option. Now it could zoom to 60 miles per hour in around 5.3 seconds, getting closer to hold on to your hats territory. The SSR's design was quite a showstopper, blending a truck's tough guy vibe with roadster chic. You could flip the hardtop open faster than you could say summer road trip, turning it from a closed cabin to an open-air joyride with just the push of a button. Pretty snazzy, right? Inside, it came with leather seats and those fancy retro touches that make you feel like you're cruising in a cool '68 Corvette or a classic Camaro, even if you were really just parked in a grocery store lot. But don't get too comfortable. Everyone noted that the interior was a bit snug. In fact, reaching for the power seat controls felt more like playing Twister than adjusting your seat. Now, despite its eye-catching looks and fun features, the SSR had some critics. Early on, folks were quick to point out that it didn't have enough oomph for a vehicle that looked this flashy. Being nearly 5,000 pounds, it didn't exactly win any agility contests, and some reviews even compared its bouncy ride to that of a, well, bouncy castle. Plus, with only room for 2 passengers and limited cargo space, using it for practical purposes was like trying to fit an elephant in a Mini Cooper. Best of luck. Number 3. 1998 to 2010 Fiat Multipla. The Fiat Multipla. Produced from 1998 to 2010, this quirky little chariot has been both lauded and laughed at, all thanks to its eye-popping design that could make a Picasso painting look traditional. Love it or hate it, this ride knew how to transport families like a pro, living its best life while leaving other vehicles in the dust when it comes to practicality. Let's talk horsepower. The Multipla rolled out with a lineup of engines, including a zippy 1.6-liter petrol churning out around 103 horses and a slightly beefier 1.9-liter diesel that mustered up around 120. While you definitely wouldn't want to take it to the races, it was perfect for cruising around town or hitting the highway without breaking a sweat. Performance? Pfft, who needs that when you've got room for the whole soccer team? Design-wise, the Multipla is the vehicle equivalent of a trendy art installation. Its extra-wide body gives it a legendary 2-row, 3-seater layout that can squeeze in up to 6 passengers. That's right, say goodbye to the days of choosing which kid gets to come along for the ride, because this beauty has space to spare. Compact MPVs, take notes. And let's not forget its exterior. With a shape that begs the question, did someone put a blender in the design room, the Multipla's short, squat stature and giant windows made it feel like you were driving around in a mobile aquarium. Who wouldn't want to feel the wind in their hair as they navigate the streets in this oversized bubble of joy? When it hit the markets, reactions ranged from what were they thinking to, oh my goodness, I need one. Sure, many rolled their eyes at its unique looks, but family-oriented folks couldn't ignore its functionality. Critics panned its aesthetics like a bad comedy routine, but hey, the Multipla was the star of the practicality show, earning a round of applause for its family-friendly setup. In the long story of car history, the Fiat Multipla stands out like a bright, odd-looking bird. It wasn't the prettiest, but it sure was practical. With tons of space inside, it made family trips easy, even if people laughed at its design. The Multipla proved that sometimes what's inside matters more than looks. Now let's dive into a car that can't quite decide what it wants to be. Part SUV, part sports car. Can you guess this curious hybrid? Number 2. 1995 to 1997 Suzuki X-90. Next up, the Suzuki X-90, 1995 to 1997, is one of those cars that makes you ask, why? And then followed up with, no, really, why? This tiny 2-seater SUV looked like a toy car that somehow got lost and ended up in a dealership. It had the proportions of a Hot Wheels car, the practicality of a go-kart, and the charm of a confused robot trying to be a sports car. Suzuki wanted to create a car that was fun, stylish, and a little different. They sure nailed the different part. The X-90 was a weird mashup of an SUV and a compact coupe, with a removable T-top roof that made it look like a wannabe sports car. But instead of being fast and exciting, it drove like a small SUV that had just woken up from a nap. Under the hood sat a tiny 1.6-liter inline-4 engine, working harder than a hamster on a wheel. It had just enough power to get you moving, but not enough to make it exciting. That meant going from 0 to 60 miles per hour took a sluggish 10.8 seconds, which in car terms feels like forever. Some folks called the X-90 sporty, but that's like calling a turtle fast, just because it hurries a little when it's hungry. The X-90 wasn't just slow, it was also wildly impractical. It had only 2 seats, so forget about carpooling. The cargo space was about 8.4 cubic feet, which meant you could fit a small backpack or maybe 2 bags of groceries, as long as you didn't buy anything bulky like a watermelon. And despite being an SUV, it had no real off-road capability. Sure, some models had 4-wheel drive, but that didn't mean much when you had a short wheelbase, low power, and the stability of a 3-legged chair. Taking it off-road was like taking a goldfish hiking. It just wasn't built for that. Shockingly, people weren't lining up to buy a car that looked like a stunt vehicle from a low-budget sci-fi movie. Suzuki only sold around 7,000 units in the US, and by 1997 they pulled the plug. It was clear the X-90 had no real audience, too weird for SUV buyers, too slow for sports car lovers, and too impractical for anyone who needed actual storage space. Over time, the X-90 found a strange second life as a promotional car for Red Bull. They slapped a giant energy drink can on the back and used it as a rolling advertisement. Fitting, because if ever there was a car that needed an energy boost, it was this one. And finally, the last car on our list is so small, it makes a VW Beetle look like a monster truck. Can you guess its name? Number 1. 1958 to 1971 Subaru 360. Hold on to your seats, because here comes a car that's a true automotive oddity, the Subaru 360. Produced from 1958 to 1971, this tiny marvel was Japan's bold attempt to create an affordable compact car for the masses. At just 8 feet long and weighing in at a featherlight 1,200 pounds, it looked less like a car and more like a toy that somehow made it onto the roads. While it found success in Japan, its American debut, well, that was a whole different story. Under the hood, the 360 boasted a minuscule 356cc two-stroke engine that could barely muster 16 horsepower. Yes, you read that right, 16. The top speed? A blistering 56 miles per hour. Fast enough to get left in the dust by a bicycle. And don't even ask about acceleration, it took nearly half a minute to reach 60 miles per hour, giving drivers plenty of time to reconsider their life choices. The 360's bug-eyed round design was either irresistibly cute or hilariously awkward, depending on your perspective. Inside, it promised seating for 4, but squeezing into the back felt like trying to fit a family into a phone booth. When Subaru tried to introduce the 360 in the US, it went from a quirky curiosity to a full-on disaster. American drivers were used to muscle cars, not this pint-sized go-kart. And then came the kicker: safety. In 1969, Consumer Reports declared the 360 not acceptable due to its flimsy structure and lack of crash protection. In the event of an accident, your best bet was to roll out before impact. Sales plummeted, and Subaru quickly pulled the 360 from the market. But in recent years, it's gained a cult following among collectors who admire its weird charm. The Subaru 360 may not have been a performance legend, but it's certainly one of the quirkiest automotive failures in history. If you enjoyed taking a trip down memory lane with these quirky failed cars, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the MuscleMania crew. We've got tons more videos about weird and wild cars, along with the best of muscle and classic rides that you won't want to miss. Like and comment below. We'd love to hear what you think of these automotive disasters. Keep watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.